Shop Talk Live, episode number 203. Bob, Mike, and me discuss sources for holly to use for inlay and banding, what you can do with 1/8 inch ebony, how close is close enough when setting up a jointer, and one listener calls us out on recommending pre-finishing nonstop and also recommending softening edges of a piece after it is assembled. Can you have your cake and eat it too? I say yes! But first, it is coming. Wednesday or Thursday, you will start to see Fine Woodworking issue number 280 trickling out. We'll talk more about it in the next episode. So keep an eye out for that. And just a reminder to everyone, sign up for the newsletter and you will get weekly notifications of everything we post here at finewoodworking.com. You can sign up for just the newsletter. You can take your name off any promo emails if that's not your thing. And on Saturdays and Wednesdays, we will send you editorial newsletters directly from myself. And it will be an update on what is going on the website, everything that we post. It's a great way of just catching you up on what we've been working on here. So sign up for that newsletter. Head on over to finewoodworking.com/newsletter. I promise you we'll try not to be too annoying. And one quick thing, make sure you sign up for Fine Woodworking Live. We've got early bird pricing going right now, and almost all of the pre-classes are filled up, so don't miss out. Get in there now, finewoodworkinglive.com. All right, here's a quick word from this week's sponsor. When you're in the middle of a long sanding session, inevitably, you're going to start to think, I wonder if this sanding disc is old and used up. And I found that the best time to switch to a new sanding disc is the moment you think about it. Every second after that is wasted time. Maverick Abrasives is a family-run manufacturer of all things abrasives, such as sanding belts and sanding discs. Their manufacturing facility is located in Anaheim, California, where knowledgeable experts are on call Monday through Friday to answer any sanding or finishing questions you have. Head on over to maverickabrasives.com and check out their wide assortment of sanding discs. They've got you covered with the best prices on the web, whether you use 5-hole, 8-hole, or Festool-hole pattern discs. To top it off, they have free shipping on orders of $200 or more. So join fellow Mavericks Ramon Valdez and Philip Morley and stock up at maverickabrasives.com today. I just need to come out and say that we know we are wearing the same shirt. We're wearing different pants.
We are not wearing the same pair of pants. This is correct.
And you are wearing the shirt you always wear. You're like the Steve Jobs of woodworking.
Well, you think about it, and lots of people wear the same shirt. Have you ever seen Tom Lee Nielsen in anything but a white shirt and a vest?
It's his brand.
Chris Bexford, I don't know when he finally changed. But
now it's always an Aloe Bean shirt.
He only had for years it was a white shirt.
Oh, really?
I never saw it in the, I don't know, maybe he changed sometime in the 90s, late 90s or later, but yeah, always the same. It's so much easier. You don't have to make decisions.
I know.
Yeah.
I just grabbed the next one on top.
That's right.
Sometimes it gets a little matchy around here. All right, question number 1. I've seen from Shane. I've seen many articles for stringing and inlay in your Fine magazine, and I'm ready to give it a shot. My only problem is I can't find anywhere to buy holly. I live in an area with only basic wood choices. I have searched online, and the only thing I see is on Etsy, and I'm not really comfortable with that. Any sources you can share for buying holly in veneer or solid form?
Basically, you can't.
Really? I thought you were going to come in with like 12.
Holly veneer is really hard to come by. Okay? Very hard to come by. There's 1 or 2 suppliers.
And you're not going to name names because you don't want to.
No, I mean, there's that I know of readily available is Domex and inlaybandings.com. Now, the inlaybandings.com, I was looking on their website, and it's standard thickness, standard modern thickness. So it was
So
like 23 thousandths, which is really thin. Domex I have bought from them before. I know Steve Latta and I bought from them years ago and we had a kind of a customer service issue. But they do have stock. You pay for it. It's not cheap. But the stuff that I've bought from them I've only bought 2 or 3 times maybe. Other places, it's kind of catch and catch can.
Really? So
yeah.
Holly's that hard to get?
Yeah.
Can you get solid stock at all?
And solid stock is hard also. With the veneer, if you can buy old stock, like Steve and I split years ago, we split all the stock that this guy down in Atlanta had, his entire inventory of Holly, and it was all like 30 or 40 years old. So it's really nice. It's about 35 thousandths, and it's oxidized, so it's not this bright in your face white. It's kind of mellow, and it's really nice stuff.
Cool.
There is finding other stuff is, sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. eBay, you can find stuff sometimes.
Okay. I would buy off of Etsy. I mean, if the seller had good ratings and everything, I would.
Yeah.
It's kind of, if that's where it's available, Etsy is the nice thing is there's ratings and there's systems in place and there's checks in place. So I would.
Yeah. I don't know anything about that, so I never have. I'll have to check that out. Solid stock is easier to find, but it's not cheap. I mean, $20, $30, $40 a board foot, and it's no kidding. And then you look at it and you go, "Oh, that thing's terrible." I mean, there's knots and it's gnarly and twisted. And, holly is not like, a piece of eastern white pine. I mean, it's a shrub.
Yeah.
And it's, if you can get 2-inch wide, 36-inch straight strip out of, in between the knots, okay, that's good. So you're really working, around the knots and all that stuff.
That's so interesting to me because as somebody who hates holly bushes in his yard, they grow.
Well,
like, I'm going to start a holly tree farm.
I was talking to Ben Barrett from Berkshire Veneers, and we were talking about holly. I was down. My son lives about 10 minutes from Mount Vernon.
Yeah.
And last time I was down there, I was like, "Wow, look at all of the big holly trees." Wait, I'm a taxpayer. I paid for those. They wouldn't miss one. They were big holly trees. But one of the reasons it's so expensive is handling that. It's cut and then it has to be refrigerated.
Okay.
I don't know much about this, but it needs to be, from what I understand, it needs to be refrigerated immediately.
I remember hearing that
it will start turning blue, blue-gray.
It's cut in winter normally.
Yeah.
Is that why?
Yeah.
Okay.
And it has to be cut down, and then it has to be refrigerated, and then when it's cut into boards, it has to immediately be stickered, and then into the kiln. So I don't, there's people probably going, "Oh, no, that's all wrong." But from what I understand, that's basically it. And it will turn gray blue. If you don't handle it right, it'll happen in an instant. And now you have gray firewood because there's nothing you can do with it. Yeah.
Huh. So in lieu of holly, what would you use?
English sycamore.
That's easier to find.
English sycamore is a much easier to find, and you can get it. Like I buy couple different sources, but B&B Rare Woods out in Colorado, and 0.6 and 0.9 millimeter. And you can tell the difference, looking, holly and sycamore. Yeah, not American sycamore, but English sycamore. And because that's more of I believe that's in the maple family, the English sycamore.
Okay.
Is that actually a maple? But like for stringing, if you use holly stringing and English sycamore stringing, and put it in a piece of wood and put a coat of shellac on it, you'd be hard pressed to tell the difference.
Okay.
In solid or in using it flat, like if you're making fans, like I make, fans and that sort of thing, yeah, you can tell the difference between the holly and the sycamore, but it's not a objectionable difference. It's just a little bit different. And you look at a lot of historical stuff, and it's like clearly that was sycamore. Yeah.
Would boxwood work? Because that boxwood stays very pale, right?
It's not as white.
Okay.
But I have some on my bench that a student gave us this summer, and I haven't played with it yet. It's a pale, creamy, kind of a yellowish. It looks really nice, and I have some plans for it that I want. I want to try some pat array stuff with that because I think it'll be really nice.
Oh.
But that's another not available. And little small. I mean, boxwood. It's another bush. So.
Do you ever do inlay? You haven't dabbled much, have you?
Let's say no.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Question number 2. What do you consider the limit for veneer sheet thickness? I want to glue up 1/8 inch thick gaboon ebony to highly figured 3/16 inch thick quartered koa. These would be the walls of a small box, about 3 to 6 inches finished board width. Envisioning them being glued up in the same direction, so not cross grain. Will they delaminate or split? Do I need a center ply oriented 90 degrees to these 2 parallel boards? Along these lines, can you safely veneer of standard thickness to standard thickness of 1/42 of an inch to a 3/8 inch thick board in the same direction? So let's talk about 1/8 inch gaboon ebony to 3/16 inch koa. You doing it?
It does not sound like it's going to work. I don't think so.
I'd be afraid.
1/8 plus 3/16?
Yeah.
So 5/16?
Yeah.
Go, 1/4 inch thick birch ply or something? Or
Well,
can you
you're
get
not
3/16?
you're not in veneer anymore. I mean, 1/8 inch thick and 3/16 is not veneer.
Yeah, I wouldn't glue those together. I think it's not going to stay flat.
Not even with a cross grain.
Well, no, then it might work. I mean, in terms of veneer, when you start getting thicker than 1/16 of an inch, now you're in. It's called wood, lumber. Veneer, basically, the definition of veneer is once the wood it's thin enough that the substrate and the adhesive can overpower the veneer's natural tendency to move, expand, and contract, because it's so when you're above 1/16, then you're starting to get into you're not going to stop it. The 1/8 inch gaboon ebony to the koa, doing a cross banding in between would be one of the traditional ideas. Either taking like 16th inch mahogany veneer and going at 90 degrees, or there's something called no black line which is 2 layers of veneer with a plastic film in between, and using that as a cross banding. And it's basically like plywood. And that was developed for industry. But I don't know. I mean, I've never done anything with ebony or koa. I mean, in that kind of thing. So I'm not really sure what the properties, how much they expand and contract
So, Mike,
in relation to each other.
you've got a piece of 1-inch thick ebony. There's not much you can do with it then,
What do you mean?
because you can't resaw it.
Sure.
Sure you can.
What? You're going to resaw an 1/8-inch stock? 1/8-inch thick.
Oh, I thought you
You're
said
starting
1 inch.
with 1/8.
Oh,
I thought
starting
you
with
said
1/8
1 inch too.
I want to glue. Well, yeah, that leads me. If I want to glue up 1/8-inch thick Gaboon ebony, because if he's resawing it, just resaw it thinner, right?
Yeah.
That's the answer.
Or use black dyed veneer. I mean,
Instead of ebony.
yeah. I mean, depending on what you're doing. I mean, you can get black dyed veneer. Now, the ebony, the grain is so fine. And
Yeah.
there's nothing like ebony. It's incredible. I mean, the ebony, working with ebony is great because the idea of it is you can smooth it and polish it so much that it looks like some of the finest extruded black plastic
black
that's
dyed
ever
veneer
been made.
is-
That's the
But-
goal.
Black dyed veneer is not going to do that. That stuff is brittle and soft, and
Depending on what you get.
with the cheap crap I buy.
Well, yeah, there are some of them. I forget the name of one of them. It's like terrible. But you can get some of it is pear and Anna Gray and that stuff. And I buy black dyed veneer, which is pretty nice stuff.
Okay.
But it's obviously not going to compare to ebony. But once you put finish on it, depending on what you're doing, if you're putting finish on something, then it might not make a difference.
So, are you planing down the 1/8-inch thick? What are you going to do in this? You're going to get 1/4-inch plywood.
I think, can you get 3/16 birch ply?
I've gotten 16th inch.
Yeah.
Yeah, so 3/16, 1/8 inch. I got 16th inch birch plywood when we did that Gerstner tool chest.
Yeah. I mean, you could glue it up over thick around a core and then just run that whole sandwich through the planer, or more likely a thickness sander is going to be safer.
Oh, okay. So glue it up and then plane it
Sure.
or sand it.
Yeah, and then plane it down.
I would find out, though, I would be looking at the tables of find out what what's the coefficient.
Yeah.
Wood movement tables?
The wood movement tables, yeah. And I would be looking those up
Yeah, I can.
and see what the difference is.
I would say the majority of my opinion on this is informed by like one bad experience. So I'm probably maybe extrapolating too far. But I was doing this this sort of Armour style entertainment center just to date myself in terms of when I'd made this. But it had doors with book match curly cherry panels in the frame and panel doors. And so it was like, but I resawed that from a fairly wide board, and one of the panels ended up too thin, but I needed to use it. So I ended up just gluing that thinner panel. I backed it up with a thicker piece of cherry. And so let's say it was maybe, I don't remember. So maybe it ended up being 1/8 of an inch thick veneer on the face to, say, 3/8 behind, or vice versa.
Okay.
So basically 2 layers of cherry in, let's say, a 1/2 inch thick panel with a single glue line. And that thing never stayed flat. It just turned into a potato chip right away. And I had to do everything I could with heating one side and hitting the other side with a heat gun just to temporarily get it flat enough in order to cove the sides and get it glued into the frame. And then it tweaked that frame out a square. And the people who had this piece, they probably had it for a good 5 or 6 years. And it always bugged me because one of the doors had a little whine to it. And they wanted to move it because no one had Armoire style entertainment centers anymore. They wanted to move it into their dining room, put glass panels into the doors and turn it into a china cabinet. And so I took that. I wanted to save the doors and just change out the panel. So I just rabbited that frame from the backside just to release that panel. And this panel just like sprung out like a potato chip, and the door frame went right back to dead flat. So it was very interesting. But no, that's the only time where I've ever laminated a single lamination of the same species. And I think that glue line was so rigid that it just moved. I have done kind of to
with
the
yellow glue.
yeah. To
Because
this,
yellow glue is more flexible.
yeah, I don't know. I mean, it just never, ever stayed flat. And I have done the thing where you do your fake half-blind dovetail drawer front, where you do through dovetails through a 1/2-inch thick drawer front, and you glue on an 1/8 or 3/16 thick piece on top of that. I've had really good success with that, to where, okay, now one of the pieces is substantially thicker and less prone to moving, I guess.
What does Tim Coleman do? Because he does, like, he did that round table that was cherry veneer directly on top of cherry. But if you veneered the other side, the bottom side, would that?
No. I don't see. I mean, I would, like I would put a piece of 16th-inch veneer on top of, cherry veneer on top of cherry solid stock.
Same grain orientation.
Yeah, I wouldn't be worried about that. Here, putting ebony and koa, I just don't know. I haven't worked with enough of them, but I would definitely look at the expansion and contraction of the two of them and see how compatible they are.
The problem with veneer questions like this is there's always somebody who has 1/4-inch veneer glued to whatever, and I did it 40 years ago, and
it's fine.
It's
so
fine.
To hell with you.
Yeah.
Well, looking to go to a museum.
Sure, but there's always going to be examples of it working.
Yeah.
But those are the ones that are still around. There's probably more examples of failures that have wound up in the fire pit. And
well, veneer's not real woodworking anyway.
So how long was this thing supposed to last?
Yeah, Mike's got a meeting after this, so he needs to get done quick.
And I'm out. You guys have fun.
But and I swear, anytime we have a question like this come up, I always get an email. It's like, well, I did this back in 1974.
Yeah.
And it's like, great, that's fantastic. But the majority of the time, if I'm going to be spending a lot of money on lumber and a lot of time and everything, I want to stack the odds in my favor.
Yeah.
I want to have the possibility of success outweigh the possibility of disaster.
Yeah.
So to do that with veneer, work 1/16 of an inch or under, and with good substrates.
Yeah, I guess, and then to Bob's point, unless you're going really heavy stock that you're gluing a thin veneer to, I think we all say we get away with it, because I say I get away with that on my drawer fronts, which is pretty thick, and you're talking about a tabletop thickness with a thin veneer. For me, when both of those things were over 1/16, but of fairly similar thickness, so it was relatively not thick, that's when I had problems, so I don't know.
So what if, because on my last headstock, it was 3/8 thick cherry, and then I did crossband crappy black veneer, and then cherry on top of, like, a 1/16 cherry veneer on top of that, and I did a pierced carving, so the black showed through.
Yeah.
So could he do something similar and just use the ebony plain down or whatever, and use black veneer as the crossbanding between that and the koa?
He's got the koa, and then so you're going to add another thing to it?
Yeah, but that's black, so it'd be less likely to show than.
Oh, along the edge.
Yeah.
I suppose. Yeah, I suppose doing it as a cross banding. I mean, I'm sure there's people going, no. Yeah, I would give that a shot because now you're looking at it so that you don't have that different color center core
Yeah,
piece.
you'd be
Yeah.
match better than mahogany or something.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I mean, as soon as you put something in the middle, now your edges, you got to deal with the edges.
I just assume you're edging everything anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you're not, then that brings up another issue.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's complicated, Paul.
Yeah.
It is, Paul.
Yeah. I mean, the veneer, ask Daryl Keel. He's the best person that I know for veneer.
Well, why don't we have him on? Why are you here?
I keep asking myself that.
All right, let's talk about our all-time favorite techniques of all time for this week. Who wants to go first?
Go ahead, Bob.
Hadn't thought about that.
Yeah, me neither.
All right, I will go. Mine is using.
I just thought of one, but go ahead.
So I was building an A-frame, like bookcase or whatever, display case for my wife, and I want to have the hinges in the middle so that it would, if you just had strap hinges on the ends of these long legs, it would open up and hyperextend. So you would need to have something to hold it all in place. So I cut little tapers into the end and put the hinge in the middle. I was like, oh, this is genius. You know, it's going to open up and stop itself from hyperextending. Went to put the hinge in and realized, oh, this is why people don't do this, because you can't put the screws in.
Oh, yeah. Not a lot of meat there, huh?
Well, no, there was plenty
just
of meat,
can't
but
get to it.
you couldn't get to it. There was no place to put a screwdriver.
Oh, I just caught up with you.
Yeah.
How do you get in there?
How do you get in there? Oh, no. And then I was like, well, all right, I'm doing this. There's got to be a way. And I was able to get one screw in and one hinge. I put the hinges on one side, open, put them together, and then I used the little 1/4-inch screw bit.
Oh, okay.
Jammed on the screw, and used a 1/4-inch open end wrench to turn the screw bit. So I took the screw bit out of the drill.
Yeah.
And didn't use a screwdriver, didn't use anything other than a wrench to turn it.
Huh.
And I posted it to Instagram, and everyone said, they make little ratchets for that. Well, nobody looked close enough because there's no way I'm getting a little ratchet. There's barely enough room for this 1/4-inch bit.
And putting the open end wrench was a good answer.
And it worked great.
Yeah.
Everybody acted like I had this unreasonable answer. It was like, this took me 2 minutes a screw. I could have gone and bought something for $20.
I think my comment to that posting was one of the best.
Was one of those, wasn't it?
Because that's the
Smart
day
ass.
that it was a beautiful, beautiful day.
Oh, yeah.
And I walked. I said, "The hell with it! I'm leaving." And I went over to Providence and went to RISD and Brown University and walked around old part of Providence. And that's what you should have done. Just go take a walk.
CT Valley. Day
Yeah.
like today, you should really go out for a walk instead.
I thought that was so much better.
But I mean, it's like, I was really proud of this solution because it worked brilliantly.
Yeah.
And there was no other way of doing this one. So
The other thing is closing the hinge on top of that bit holds the bit into the screw.
It keeps it from.
Well, no, that's not on purpose. That's as wide as it would go.
Right, but
That
it's
is-
putting pressure down on the bit, so it's holding the bit into the screw.
So that was using a 3/4-inch screw. If I had
Yeah.
used a 1-inch screw, it wasn't
have
going to
gotten
work
in.
as well,
Yeah.
or a 5/8 inch,
Yeah.
it wasn't going to work as well. It was
Yeah.
kismet. It was meant to be.
Yeah.
Cool.
So that's my technique.
My technique is changing out the tires of my bandsaw and putting new guide bearings in while I was at it.
Didn't you figure out that they were frozen or something though?
Yeah, I kind of knew that.
All those bearings freeze. You just deal with it.
Yeah. But there's so many bearings. It's like there's so many guide bearings on the upper guide. There's 2 pairs of stacked bearings side to side,
Oh,
plus
I
the
hate
thrust
those.
bearing. Below, I've got the 2 pairs of stacked bearings. So there's like 10 total bearings. So
Wait, you have 2 pairs of stacked bearings?
yeah, side to
As a
side.
side-to-side guide.
That the
Yeah.
blade
Really?
pinches between.
Oh, I don't
That's
have...
more the European. I can't
Yeah.
stand those things.
So,
Yeah.
one freezes. Who cares? I got 7 more that are spinning around. No, I had to saw apart because the wheels were, I think they had lost their elasticity. I don't know if you ever had this, Bob, but I was doing a lot of heavy resawing. I think the blade was heating up. I think it was heating up the urethane tires. And they were slipping off the wheels a little bit. Like the top one slipped off halfway. I was able to shove it back on, slipped off halfway again. I shoved it back on. The bottom one, that one started to slip and started to get chewed up and everything. I kind of struggled my way through the job and then just took the whole saw apart, pulled the tires off the wheels, ordered some new tires, got those in place, and I was threading my brand new bandsaw blade on my brand new tires. I remembered, these bearings, how frozen are they? It's like, yeah. So
haven't moved in a year.
I stopped. I ordered all new bearings, waited another 3 days to get my package from Grizzly, got them in there, and now I'm happy. Now it's just like back to new. So that's pretty nice. That's a nice feeling.
You know what I did the other day? I changed my bandsaw blade, and I didn't adjust the tracking before adjusting the bearings.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And like I get the bearings adjusted. All of a sudden, like, spin the wheel, be like, what? I swear I set that. I swear I set those bearings. And like I'd go to saw something and and all of a sudden it's like, oh, I open up the top and the blade is just drifting all over that tire. And of course nothing is lining up on the bearings consistently because it's not, it felt so stupid. But Bob, do you have a technique yet? Did you?
Not really, but I just thought of something. I said, we're talking about dovetails and all, and I was just thinking, last week, I was cutting dovetails in a large case.
Yeah, what was that case for? Is that a tool case?
It's part of it's going to be an apothecary chest.
Okay.
For the Windsor Historical Society. We're doing some more furniture for the Dr. Chafee office that they're reinterpreting. So, the top case was like 36 inches long and 34 wide, and then I think it's 18 deep, solid cherry.
Wow, that's big.
And it's all lap dovetails. So the sides are the pin boards, and then the top and bottom are the tail boards that come down onto it.
Okay.
And most people, when they cut lap dovetails or half blind dovetails, when they're doing the pins, they're holding that board vertically in the vise.
Yeah.
And then they're sawing, and it's really, really uncomfortable and awkward. And depending on the length of the piece, it's a case side, so now you could be much higher than you wanted to be. You're standing on milk crates or something, and there's no support because you're, out of the vise.
Right.
And I look back at most period furniture, the drawers.
Here it comes.
Okay, there's an overcut in the drawer
There
on
it
the
is.
inside. Yeah, I know. But you look at that and go, okay, the reason they did that was to make clearing the waste easier. But if you were holding the board vertically and trying to do that overcut, it's really hard to do. It's really awkward.
Yeah, because you're going down
You're
further.
almost vertical, but if you go and just put the board horizontally on your bench, now...
Is this because you've been hanging out with Andrew Hunter?
I don't think he does that, does he?
I think so.
Do they have... I don't know.
Or sorry.
I don't know. But if you do the, like, so I'll always do overcuts in drawers because I'm fine with that. The sweaters don't mind, and no one sees it. But on this large case piece, obviously I didn't want to do overcuts because you'd see them, but holding it vertically would be really hard and uncomfortable. And just holding the whole board on the bench horizontally was so easy to cut and so easy to hold.
Did you hold it secure with holdfast or something?
I think on one end I had a holdfast, and on the other side I had a clamp, and right up to the front edge of my bench. And so I had to kind of kneel down a little bit, but that was much easier to do than, I'm 3.5 feet in the air, and I'm a foot away from the nearest vise, and you're trying to cut vertically or just off of vertically, and you can't see anything, because if you're doing that, now what's going on with the on the end grain? Are you messing up that? Yeah, it's just try it sometime.
Yeah,
it's gonna feel weird until you do it once or twice, and then you go, whoa, this is much easier. And I'm convinced that that's how all of these pieces were done.
So this is on the pin board.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the case side.
Why would if you did do overcuts, why wouldn't they be on the inside?
They would be on the inside, and
in an apothecary cabinet,
you would see them. In fact, last week I went down to Connecticut Historical Society because there was a Aaron Chapin desk and bookcase that I wanted to look at because it was similar to this piece that we were doing, and I wanted to look at it. And so the head of collections there, I met with her, and we went up to the storage area, and I'm looking at this piece, and I put my flashlight on it, and I was like, wow. On the inside of the case, they overcut every single one of them, completely visible. Now, I would never do that.
Okay, so there's no like drawer carcass covering it up or anything
Nothing.
like that.
It was like all you do is open the door and go, oh, look at that.
Huh.
Yeah, I was amazed because and especially as Aaron Chapin. I mean, it's not like he's some kind of second-rate cabinet maker.
I think it was one guy who gets hired until he cuts dovetails like that and he gets fired. And then he goes to another shop until that's all you see.
Some guy traveling around
turnover.
Connecticut.
The turnover was amazing.
How did you secure the boards for scribing the tails onto the pins? Was that still sort of in a traditional way?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
and there's a couple different ways of doing it. I did it the traditional way because I cut the tails first.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, and sometimes, but I also make a rabbet. Like so on this large case.
Yeah, I was going to say, so you have a rabbit.
So I have a rabbet on my tail.
Yep.
And so I can clamp that thing, and I had a bar clamp, clamping the pin board to the tail board. And, you can tap and register it and go, okay, now you can clamp that thing. I had 2 clamps on it, and it was a piece of cake. I mean, you clamp that thing and you can transfer half of it and then go take a break. Go do something and then come back. It was easy. But yeah.
Nice.
Yep.
All right.
Cool.
Let's take a break. Christian Bexford, Peter Follensby, Peter Galbert, Chris Gochner, Garrett Hack, Dave Richards and David Heim, Nancy Hiller, Raleigh Johnson, Steve Latta, Tom Lee Nielsen, Christina Madsen, Tom McLaughlin, Mike Pekovich, Chris Schwarz, Bob Van Dyke, and this year, the patron saint of hand tools, Roy Underhill. If that lineup doesn't get you excited, nothing will. Fine Woodworking Live 2020, April 17th through 19th, Southbridge, Massachusetts. Early bird registration right now. Get on it. Question number 3 is from Michael. I recently purchased a new 8-inch joiner and have watched a YouTube video on setup. In that video, the presenter goes to extraordinary lengths to make sure that the tables are coplanar within 0.02 of an inch. I don't understand why. If the joiner makes a flat face and the planer creates a parallel opposite side, what difference does it make if the joiner takes a couple of thousandths of an inch on one side? Let's go that far. There's more to this question, but it's about edge joining. But there's a lot here.
The thing is, if it's not coplanar, it won't make a straight plane. It'll be bowed. And I don't understand exactly why in the whole thing. I know though that if it's I mean, we were doing something yesterday and trying to get this one piece of wood dead straight, the joiner, my joiner is not exactly right, and it was I think it's sagging a little bit, and that piece just was not coming out perfectly straight, and so yeah, it has to be. I'm not enough of an engineer to give you all the why.
Yeah, I mean, so what you're talking about coplanar, and that's what I typically think about is, as you're looking at the joiner from the side, are the two beds along their lengths in the same plane? Mm-hmm. And the question made it sound like he's worried about coplanar across the width of the beds, because he said, who cares if one edge is thicker than the other or something?
As in twisted.
As in twisted.
Yeah. So that's what you don't want wind between the tables.
It won't work.
Yeah.
And the easiest way of checking that, to me, sometimes you do things that you're going too far, but the easiest way of checking whether there is wind between the tables and assuring that there isn't is making sure that each side is perfectly coplanar with each side of the infeed table is perfectly coplanar with the opposing side of the outfeed table.
The edge, the front edge and the back edge.
And if they are, then there will not be wind in the tables.
Yeah. I mean, probably one of the more common problems that Bob alluded to is the outfeed table or the infeed, one of the two tends to sag over time. So you have the two tables as they meet is higher in the middle than they are. What happens as you're referencing on the infeed side of the table and you're making your cut, it's going across the across the cutter head, and everything is good. But then as it extends further onto the outfeed table, and you always pressure down on the outfeed table, that's your reference surface. But what happens if it's sagging and you're pushing that stock down, it in essence lifts up the tail of the stock off of the infeed side, and you end up with this taper that you never get rid of. It's this increasing taper where you're taping across the leading edge. The leading edge is referenced on a sagging table, which kicks up the trailing edge, which never gets cut.
Okay, so you wind up with a thinner front of the
thinner
board.
at the front.
You have a taper.
And that was a good explanation.
And it's the same. You get the same problem when you have the knives set too low in relation to the outfeed table.
Yep.
But
you get exactly the same problem.
Exactly.
That said, if you wind up with a tapered board,
well, sometimes it just never gets flat.
It won't be straight.
Okay.
Yeah. Like you don't ever get rid of the defects. You end up with a 1/2-inch thick board on the front end. You're still not down to the surface on the rear end.
Oh.
So you just never.
And even if it's cutting the whole way, if they're not dead straight coplanar, then the surface that you're getting is not going to be straight. That's what we were experiencing yesterday, where it was a little bit of a bow every time. And it was, it was a 36-inch piece that, it was maybe bowed a little, not a 16th. It was less than a 16th, but it was still there, and it was irritating. And, so, but, and... I mean, I looked up some old joiner articles from Fine Woodworking. From
That's my joiner.
John, is this
That's my joiner.
from John White?
That was the shop joiner. That's mine now.
Yeah. This one, and then this one, or even earlier, from Bernie Moss. And there were two. It was good. Some of these old articles were really good in terms of explaining exactly what's working and how it's working,
Right.
and why.
Also, we did a video with Matt Wada setting up that same joiner.
Did that get into the diagnosing those problems?
Yeah, and
complain or not complain.
and he's really good at explaining stuff like that.
Yeah.
He's really good at setting up machinery too.
Yeah.
And I think I've said this before. Like, my mom watches everything Fine Woodworking produces, and she was like, "I watched that joiner setup video. It's really interesting how the elevator screws are reverse thread." And it was like, "What is wow?" And like, one of these days, I kind of want her to watch that video again and then go set my joiner up,
Exactly.
because I bet you she could. She has no idea what to do with it.
Hey,
But
Mom,
yeah.
do me a favor.
Can you come over while I'm at work? Can you set up my joiner? Wouldn't that be great?
That'd be fantastic.
Yeah. All right. Question number 4 is from Larry. Calling us out. In episode number 110, you recommended chamfering edges with a high grit sandpaper after the piece had been assembled. In subsequent episodes, I'm fairly certain it's been mentioned that it's good practice to finish the parts of a piece before assembly, especially if you're using a film finish. Chamfering an edge after assembly would remove the finish, right? Do you apply a final finish that covers the chamfered edges then? I'm confused about these seemingly contradictory recommendations. Mike, he's calling you out.
I don't think there's a contradiction. I think bottom line is you're always doing all of your shaping, surfacing, chamfering before you put a finish on. So if you're pre-finishing before assembly, you're just doing all your chamfering before you're putting the finish on. Pre-finishing works out really well if you don't have to flush the parts down after the fact. Like if you're building a frame and panel door and it's super hard to glue up a frame so all 4 pieces are dead level, you always plan on planing that flush anyway. So I would never pre-finish the faces of a frame for a frame and panel door. I would pre-finish the inside edges that go against the panel because that's super hard to get some finish on. But
what about with your doors where everything's kind of offset from itself, where you're not necessarily flushing things up?
Yeah, so if anything's offset, like, if I'm cutting dovetails that have to get flushed down, I don't pre-finish those because you end up planing like drawer sides. I would never pre-finish the outside of drawer sides because I'm planing down those dovetails flush. But on a case where the dovetails are proud or the tenons are proud, all that gets pre-finished because there is no surfacing or flattening or truing up afterwards. But your point is absolutely right in that you don't want to do any sort of chamfering or anything after you've finished. It's just more, what can you safely pre-finish and do all your planing and chamfering then? What do you have to do? Wait until after glue up if you are doing some flushing and planing and stuff, and then, wait and do the finish after that. So I think the question is correct in terms of what his understanding was, but I think the missing thing is, if you can pre-finish, do your surfacing first. If you have to wait to finish, then, do your surfacing first after the fact.
Well, and you're pre-finishing on, let's say, a trestle table isn't as big of a deal as it is on a wall cabinet with little nooks and crannies here and there. That's
Sure.
So, one rule does not apply to everything.
Nope.
Yeah.
When do you chamfer?
When do I chamfer?
Or when do you soften edges? I think he means soften edges more than chamfer.
And all of my edges, I do chamfer with a block plane, and then I hit it with 320 paper on a sanding block, like 1 or 2 strokes. But I would do anything like that. I would always do before I assembled it. I mean, each piece is basically 100% done before it gets put together, before it gets assembled. Now, different from Mike. Mike applies finish to most things.
Whenever I can.
Yeah, most things. And I'm basically kind of going over to the dark side a little bit and agreeing with him because it, I have started to come around a bit.
Let's date stamp this. Can we?
What's that?
Date stamp it.
Traditionally, most people don't finish prior to assembly. I used to kid around years ago. It was like the only articles that I ever saw that were talking about finishing before assembly were written by finishers. And if you look back, that's what happened. But a lot of times it makes sense, and what I've seen Mike do and I've learned from him, I was like, yeah, that makes sense to do that. I would never do a finished finish.
Right.
I'll put a wash coat on. And I do that a lot of times now where I'll put a wash coat on shellac.
And then if you burn through that, if you do any other stuff,
because you're
that's
always
okay.
going to have to do, after assembly, you always have to do some adjusting, planing, whatever. I mean, in most of Mike's stuff, because he has so many different levels or surfaces, protrusion, one's a 16th of an inch proud, so a lot of there, because you're not dealing with flush surfaces,
right,
it's not as much of an issue. But if you're dealing with flush surfaces, then you're not going to get that off the clamps.
Right. Yep.
You're going to have to come back and fix that.
Yeah.
Which is why, like Federal furniture, veneered furniture, Federal is usually dead flat, and it's like really challenging. And it's like, and then
it looks so easy.
Yeah, well, it's not even real woodworking, according to some people that I've heard.
Legos.
My 4-year-old grandson, yes, he can do that.
So, I was almost feeling guilty for a minute, feeling in between, because I keep seal coat cut, 50-50 in a bottle on my bench, and I also keep seal coat straight in a separate bottle on my bench. But and I wash everything down with it. And then if I need to chamfer an edge after the fact, I don't care. Yeah. I'm just, because then I just pick it up and just wipe it on again. Yeah. But if there's a nook or a cranny, there is something on it, and it helps with squeeze out. It helps with all sorts of things. But one thing that you did not mention in your regimen, though, is that your block plane that you chamfer edges with. Yeah.
And I have one block plane, the Lee Nielsen 102, the little guy, and I have that set all the time with a ultra high micro bevel, 45-degree micro bevel. And if you've ever tried using the 45-degree micro bevel, like I'll do that on, doing surfaces. If I'm having tear out problems, that ultra high micro bevel gets rid of any tear out problems. And I learned that from Tom Lee Nielsen, and I did it on the low angle jack plane.
He told you it only works on his planes, though, right?
That's all. It and that's true. It only works on his planes. But I took that same idea, because when I learned that, and I was like, whoa, no tear out ever. I took the same idea to a block plane for chamfering edges, because when you have two edges intersecting, or two faces intersecting in an edge, quick, tell me, what's the grain direction?
Depends on the face you're looking at.
I have no idea.
Yes.
You know, and there's nothing worse than chamfering an edge and go click, 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 and you get all that little tear.
Yes.
It's
You can.
It's like which face is running out more, and then which is the quarter sawn versus the plain sawn face, because the quarter sawn's going to tear out more. So you want to skew the plain to favor the quarter sawn face.
Is this the math that actually you do?
Yeah.
You do that math, don't you?
Yeah. And then I guess and take a pass, and if it's click, click,
Exactly.
click.
And you go, oh, that wasn't the right way.
Yes. Flip it around. Yeah. I was doing a tabletop for this entry table, long oak tabletop, and there was just enough swirl on the grain along the edge. I just looked at it, put the block plane down, got a sanding block, and sanding was
And
gonna
you
be
can get with you can get the same, almost the same effect, sanding an edge if you do it right. And that doesn't mean wrapping a piece of sandpaper around a cork block. It's taking what I call sanding sticks, and I'll take a piece of sandpaper, and in this case, if I was going to do an edge, I would use like 320 or 400 grit, and spray glue it to a piece of MDF, and then cut the MDF to whatever sizes I want. And using that, it's a hard sanding block, so there's no give. And so you can get a crisp chamfer off of that.
Yeah.
You know, and if you had to, I've done that plenty of times.
Yep.
You know, and you get the same look.
You have a little drawer full of those, don't you?
Well, no, I have a box full of those, and they're on their way to being shipped to San Diego for Fine Woodworking hands-on.
Oh.
And so I wrap sandpaper around a block, and it's all soft edge, and it kills me.
Yeah.
Just because I didn't want to make another sanding stick, because that would have taken 2 minutes.
Yeah,
I'm trying to figure out. I had a year ago, I had a huge box full of them.
Yeah.
On by the grinder in the shop.
this problem. You tell Mike where they are.
I think you got them because they're all gone.
I think you have some of mine, because every time I teach at your place, I come back and I have half the sanding sticks that I started out with.
Well, there is that. Yeah.
I
And
was
every
just-
once in a while, and the same thing with blue tape. I have bunches of rolls of blue tape, and on the inside there's a MP written on it.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's
kills
MP
me.
everywhere.
That's expensive.
He's been
I know.
swiping double-sided tape from you too.
Don't tell.
Michael Fortune had a thing about I think that's. Oh no, he had like a rack full of different grits.
Yeah,
yeah.
I learned about the sanding sticks from Michael Fortune.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, that's stupid. And then I was teaching at your place, and you had them, and that's where I actually used them for the first time. And said, this is brilliant. Never mind.
Yeah.
And I've used them ever since.
Yeah, I don't know where I saw them, but yeah, they're really handy.
And
And someone was like, "Oh, you cut those on the table saw? Doesn't it destroy the table saw on the bench?"
I have a quick, like you said that, and a part of me cringes too, but I know it's
I
like
can't bring myself to do it.
It doesn't. Well, first of all, you want to make sure that the sandpaper is up and not down, because it's hard to slide it across the table if it's down.
But I put sandpaper on both sides.
Well, see, that's the problem. I've seen you do that.
Yeah.
No, I don't do that. I just it's.
how often do you get your table saw blade sharpened though?
I'll bet you.
You run a school. So
My
this is
blades
not-
go out. Every blade that I have probably goes out at least twice a year.
Because, Bob, you never clean the pitch off your blades.
I did yesterday.
Did you?
We were doing something. I was like, okay, let's. It was the box joint blade, believe it or not.
I'll show Mike.
And I still have the cardboard in the garbage can to prove it.
like an old boss of mine who went through cars fairly quickly, and the joke was that whenever his ashtray got full, he got a new car.
Exactly.
So, whenever your blades get too dirty, you just send them out to be resharpened because they're just not cutting worth a damn anymore.
Well, I kid around. I said most of the time when I'm cleaning blades, the only time I clean blades, when it's a beginner class, I'm demonstrating you got to clean blades. So I'll spray some stuff on it, and I usually forget to come back and clean it off. So it's just dried on gunk.
The other cool thing about the sanding sticks is you have a safe edge to it. Because you've got that, I make them out of MDF. I think you do as well. So you have the sandpaper right up to the corner on one face, and then the adjacent face, it's just MDF. So if you're sanding right to the inside face of a rabbit or the shoulder of a tenon, you can sand just the cheek without gouging your shoulder of your tenon inadvertently.
You know what's weird is that now that I think about this, so I've always done MDF sanding blocks like that, and I always did it with sticky back sanding paper, and on one side I wrapped it around the 90. Oh, and on one side I left it safe.
Ooh, wow!
And now I can't think why I would need it wrapped around the 90. Like I thought, oh yeah, next level. That's you improving everything. No,
I can see how.
Well, like, what are you gonna do with it?
When would you need that?
Yeah. I really thought I was smart.
Something you might need it.
Paper.
I have no idea. But
sanding into a V groove or something. You just want to hit it at once.
Yeah, I mean, I could see it, but wouldn't be one of those things that you've got it there ready to go one of these days.
Yeah. I'm gonna,
it's quick enough to make one.
I have 2 blocks, or it's quick enough to turn it around. And
there you go. There you go.
I'm gonna have to look at the edges of my 2 blocks right now and see if there's anywhere on that side at all.
Yeah, but it is a really handy thing, and I see people, picking up, sanding stuff. I have specific sanding blocks. It makes me crazy. I watch people and they pick up the nearest scrap of wood off the floor, and that's the sanding block that they're wrapping their piece of sandpaper around, and they're working on something and I'm like, no, it's either a cork block or a hard felt block. And there's a little bit of give. It's designed for that.
Pattern inlaid and
there's that and binding. I'm binding put around, from some of the finest stuff that Stu Mac sells. Yeah.
All right. Let's see. Listener comment on iTunes from KCCFW. Great changes. I was initially turned off with the constant how to sharpen my hand tool repetition.
Well, what you want to do?
But it's been great. More content variety
stones?
has taken things up to a whole new level. Thanks for the 5-star review. That helps us show up in other podcast players and helps more people find the show. So that really does help. But all right. Anybody have any recommendations? Last minute throw in things?
Been listening to Revisionist History. Malcolm Gladwell podcast is great. And then his sister podcast, Broken Record, which is about music. It's really good. It's awesome.
It's the worst. You want a great music podcast? Check out Cocaine and Rhinestones.
Yeah, that kind of sucked. I didn't like that.
That's a great name, though,
Podcast recommendation, Criminal. It's really good.
Okay.
It's not just gore stuff. All right. You don't listen to podcasts?
Never
especially
listen to
this
podcasts. Every once in a while, if I'm driving to DC, I'll listen to this, but that's the only thing.
Well, you had bought a new car and you took it back because every time you started the car, the radio kicked on to a Fine Woodworking Shop.
No,
Top
that's
Live
my
podcast.
present car. That's my present. The other car I took back because it was
the worst
ridiculous.
car ever.
I'm one of the 3 people in the state of Connecticut that can't stand Subarus. But yeah, every time I turned the car on, it interacted with my iPhone, and I got to listen to Mike Pekovich talking about sharpening or something. And it was like, 7:00 in the morning. No, that's not really what I wanted to do.
Tom McKenna's
Stop.
like slipping 20s to the Honda guy, programming the radio on the way out. All right. Well, that's all for this episode of Shop Talk Live. If you have any questions you'd like us to answer on the show, send them into shoptalk@taunton.com. If you are watching on YouTube, please click that thumbs up button. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another episode. Thanks for listening.
Still have open spots in Peter's class this weekend?
Yeah. Want to come?
You would take a Peter Fonsby class?
Oh, totally. Carving?
Yeah.
Yeah. Anything with Peter, actually. I would do anything with Peter.
Ballroom dancing?
Yeah, just for the hoot.
That's a visual. That's a visual.
Why not?